This is Stacey Brown Randall with Straight Talk on Business Growth on WYTV7, the Christian Broadcasters Association. I don't know why I started with national. Okay, so I am so excited to be back with you guys for our second episode. I'm so excited that you're joining me. It is such a pleasure to be here and kind of start sharing some of the information I have learned through some hard lessons, hard times that I have been through on growing a successful business. So I'm excited to spend this time with you, and I'm glad you're back for episode 2. And if you are joining me for the first time, so if you just happen to stumble across this or someone told you, hey, you got to check out Straight Talk on Business Growth, well, I'm glad you're here as well, and I hope you'll join me every week as we release a new episode. And of course, not just taking in my show, Straight Talk on Business Growth, but all the shows that all the individual broadcasters are putting on as well. So in the first episode, we talked about who this show is for, right? And we talked a little bit about my journey in terms of why I'm talking to you about business growth. I share with you the mission of this show, which is to share hard lessons learned, right? Hard lessons learned that I learned the hard way with other business owners so that they can press on, share in their success, and of course, reflect Christ. And I mentioned that our verse that really sums up what I ultimately want all business owners to feel and to know and to be able to come back to is Philippians 3:14, which is I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So this idea that we are here to run successful businesses, to deal with the ups and the downs, and to press on through all of that because our ultimate goal, our end goal is coming. It's just not here on this earth. And so while we're here, though, we want to make sure that we are reflecting Christ in all that we do. And so I am excited to be sharing some business growth conversations with you, tactical, practical tips that you can implement right away to truly start growing your business in ways maybe you never have before, or maybe you're doing great and you're just going to pick up some additional tips that'll help you to keep moving forward. All right, so for today's episode, I talked about last episode who this show is for, and then of course we talked a little bit about my background, but this time around we're going to dig in. We're going to dig in a little bit to the backstory of who I am and my business failure and what I learned, because I think that is extremely important as kind of like just that ability for us to level set and to be on the same page, to understand where the lessons are going to come from that I'm going to share with you throughout this entire fall season. Now, as I mentioned, we're also going to be following along with the Generating Business Referrals Without Asking, my book, that you can purchase anywhere books are sold. And of course, if you engage with me, whether send an email or comment on any of the social media platforms about the show that you've watched it, or through obviously watching the episodes on YouTube, I'm going to pick a winner every week and send you a copy of this book free. So I'm excited to get this book into your hands if you're interested. Now, if you can't wait, or you're the type of person who never wins anything, well, you're in my boat. So I never win anything when there is a contest. So if you know you may not win anything, right? That's okay. You're just like me. Then, of course, I'd love for you to go ahead and purchase the book wherever books are sold. But for today, we're going to talk about my business failure journey. So if you are following along in the book, if you watched the last episode, our first one, and you're like, oh, they're following along, where is she in the book? Today, we're going to start with chapter 1. And I think it's important for me to kind of share with you why chapter 1 is starting with business failure, because that seems so disappointing on some levels or so negative on some levels. But the truth is, it's because my journey starts with failure, and that's okay. So many people ask me all the time, why do you define it as a failure? Actually, my husband, Norm, came on my podcast. It was episode 60 of my podcast, Roadmap to Grow Your Business. And he came on the episode, and I do this question and answer every 10th episode. I have someone from my family come on as the guest interviewer, and they ask me listener-submitted questions. So on Roadmap to Grow Your Business, every 10th episode, you will hear someone from my family that is actually interviewing me, but they're asking me questions that people would ask me about business growth, referrals without asking, client experiences, those type of things. And if you go to episode 30, it's actually my son. If you go to episode 40, it's my daughter. And if you go to episode 50, it's actually my other son. And then episode 60, because I ran out of kids, I only have 3. And that is more than enough. But with episode 60, I actually talked my husband into coming on the show to actually be the guest interviewer. But we changed it up. And instead of talking about business growth stuff, we actually just talked about being both spouses, like being married together in a family where we both own our own businesses. And we talked about what his perception on me was when it came to running my businesses. So instead of asking me business growth questions, he asked me questions like, what do you think you're really good at as a business owner? And what do you struggle with? That was a fun question to have to answer. He asked me questions like, are you ever going to publish your second book? Which he just really wanted to hold my feet to the fire for me to make a commitment. And he got one out of me. But he asked me another question. And actually, the question was that I asked him. So at the end, I was like, okay, I'm not the only one in the hot seat. Let me ask you some questions. So I asked him to talk about what I was like while I was going through my business failure. What was I like when that business was failing? And I'll give you the backstory on what the business was in just a moment. But what he ultimately came out to say was he didn't see my business failure as a business failure. Now, I think that's what an amazing spouse would say, right? Because Norm's pretty smart and he's like the nicest guy you'll ever meet. But he said, I didn't see your business as a business failure because I know you see it that way and I know you claim it and you own it and you've been happy to label it that because it matters to me in that way. He goes, but I didn't see it as a business failure. I hear lots of people say that. When I talk to them about my first business, they're like, I just don't know if you should say it's a business failure. I'm like, here's the thing. The business failed because I had to shut down its doors and I had to go get a job. And that's okay. Now, it wasn't anything I actually ever want to repeat, but it was a part of my journey. It was a part of the path that God had me on, that he wasn't picking on me, but he had handpicked me to walk that path. And at the time, I couldn't tell you why. The thought of having to go back and get a job after I had been a business owner for 4 years, I was aiming to make it to the 5-year mark. Do you know that 80% of all businesses will fail before they hit the 5-year mark? It's kind of a scary statistic. Well, I was one of them. So that puts me in the business failure club. And the truth is, unfortunately, fortunately, however you want to look at it, I'm in a really good company. There's a lot of amazing people who've gone on to be super successful that have a failure, a business failure in their past. And I don't just mean like a blip on the screen. I don't just mean, oh, I lost this major client. And I don't just mean, oh, I had to change the direction of my business. I mean, the business fell apart. It failed. And I took a job. And I think in that moment, it's important for people to understand that you may not want to label it as a failure because everyone has like this, oh, it's just not a good positive word. But for me, it's a label that allows me to remind myself of where I don't want to go back to. And sometimes when I have that ability, because I'm like everybody else in the world, to procrastinate or to put off what I should be doing or not really focusing on what I need to get done, right? I'm not being as motivated and I'm not being as focused on my business. That label of, hey, you know what this looks like if you go back there, that label helps me. It's that swift kick in the hiney that I need sometimes to keep moving forward and to do the hard things I got to do when I'm trying to run this business. And I think that's an important piece, that it's okay that I recognize. Now, I love the fact that my husband says, I didn't think it was a business failure. It's okay that I define it as one. And I truly do believe that even though it was a business failure, it was the right thing for me to go through. Now, at the time, I didn't understand why I was going through it. I think that's what happens when we're going through trials and tribulations. But I've also learned that God uses those moments to prepare us for something else he wants us to do. And that's the thing about God, right? He's like, not going to tell you what the whole plan is. Not going to tell you that, Stacey, so many years later, you're going to be running a successful business and you're going to have this moment of where you now know how to help so many more people all across the country because I'm going to give you this idea that you're going to be able to run with. And I never would have expected that so many years later after that business failure, almost 6-7 years after that business failure, I would have a program called Growth by Referrals that serves clients, students, what we call them inside the program, an online program on how to generate referrals without asking in 7 different countries, not just in the United States, but England, Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and Canada, and of course, the United States. And that I would be able to learn some hard lessons through my business failures and then put myself in a different position to do something different, to learn new things, to be able to share them with others, to help them avoid the same lesson that I had to learn the hard way, which is my business failure. So I think if I didn't start our first episode really digging into content and not talking about my business failure, everything I want to teach you about how you fill your prospecting pipeline and the 3 plans you need to have within your sales strategy. And then, of course, everything I want to teach you over those episodes throughout this season that we're going to spend together about referrals wouldn't make any sense. You need to understand the backstory. So yes, if me calling myself, no, it's not really me as the failure. It was the business that failed. I just happened to be in charge of it, right? So if it makes you uncomfortable that I refer to this as a failure, just know it's a motivating, positive connotation for me. I actually don't mind talking about my business failure. Of course, then I didn't like talking about it, but now I know that I have a platform to use to share the things that other people need to hear without having to experience them themselves. And I know it's just part of my journey, part of the journey that God had me on. It's part of the path he had me on and walking down it. Now, I don't know if I took some steps that he would have been like, what are you doing? And I wasn't listening to him, which led me to that failure. Maybe he could have had a different plan if I had listened to him differently along the way. But I do know that he's used what's happened to make a very beautiful thing come to be. And that's pretty awesome. And I know he can do that for others because, he's God. That's what he does, right? It's pretty incredible. So I want to talk to you about my business failure. And I want to do it under the kind of the lens of another very particular verse. And the verse for today's episode is actually one verse prior to the one we were talking about. That's the overall verse, Philippians 3:14, for this entire show, Straight Talk on Business Growth. It's actually Philippians 3:13. And the verse goes, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. And when I listened to my pastor one Sunday talk about this verse, he talks about how the devil tries to get us stuck in the past, which basically just means out of the presence of God. And that's where he can put shame right on us, or maybe pride in some cases, because we stop moving forward towards the Lord, right? We stop moving forward towards Jesus and we stop seeking that. And we're just so focused on the things that happened to us in the past. And I think that that is one thing that God had taught me very quickly and very early on to this journey is it's there. Your business failure exists. Learn from it, understand it, use it to be a motivating factor if you need it, but you've got other places to go and I need you to press on. I need you to move forward. I need to take you somewhere else. So I need you to get out of being stuck in the past and worrying about, I had a business failure. What will people think of me? Right? Because, let's be honest, people can be mean and they gossip and they talk about you behind your back. I mean, I am totally guilty of that. So the idea is that I think that when we stay stuck in something that we've had in our past, right, that's exactly where the devil wants us. And what God is saying is like, hey, yeah, this was awful, right? And a business failure isn't nearly as bad as losing a loved one, right? Isn't nearly as bad as losing your house to bankruptcy. I mean, those were things I was able, obviously, to avoid with my business failure, but I still went through, it was still emotionally and mentally draining and hard. It was still physically taxing. And to be honest, the hardest thing was the blow to my ego. But it isn't like what some people deal with the loss of a loved one, the loss of a child, a cancer diagnosis, right? A terminal illness. Like there are a lot of things that are placed in front of us and we don't know why they're happening. And I'm not going to speculate why. And there's usually no rhyme or reason in terms of you did something to cause it. That's not usually how it works when these terrible things happen. But God does use them because we live in a broken world. God does use them to help us move forward if we're willing to move forward. And the devil just wants to hold us back. And God wants us to be like, nope, keep going, move forward. We need to get away from the shame of what's happened in your past. So the reason why I talk so openly about my business failure is because I know that it helps other people to listen to say, hey, you know what? I get it. I may have had that in my past too. But Stacey knows that there's a path forward. She walked it, right? And I can too. And so I can press on because again, the goal we're ultimately after is not here on this earth. It's, up there, right? In the better place we're all headed. And we need to do what we can do now to make sure we're reflecting Christ. So let me tell you a little bit about my first business that failed and the big lessons I learned. And then those 3 big lessons are going to be what kind of kicks off our next episode coming up. But so here's what I learned from my business failure. So my business at the time, I started at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, and it was an HR consulting firm. And no, the recession had nothing to do with my business failure. In fact, 2009 and 2010 were my best 2 years, even a little bit of 2011. The business would go on to fail sometime in 2012, and that's when I would go and get a job. And I would have that job for 15 months before I would start my second business, the business I'm in now, in 2013. So when I think about my business failure, I had big name clients in my business in the past. Like if you looked at my first business, that HR consulting firm, I was an expert in generational diversity and employee engagement. And when you looked at my clients like KPMG, one of the big 4 accounting firms in the world, BDO, another large accounting firm, Ally Bank, Coca-Cola Bottling Consolidated, and you looked at some of the big name clients that I worked with, you would have thought my business was doing great. But it wasn't. And my business had a secret. And that secret is that the first big secret my business had was that I wasn't touching business development every day. In a way, I was filling my prospecting pipeline so that I had enough work coming out the bottom with people saying yes to hiring me. As a small business owner or a solopreneur, you know the worst thing we do for ourselves? We work really hard when we start our business and we get our first client. And then we put our head down and we work on that client. And when that client work is done, we look up and we're like, oh my gosh, wait, there's no more. And then we enter this hamster wheel. Now, the first year is a hamster wheel. Sometimes your second year is a hamster wheel. And that hamster wheel is okay because it teaches you if you really want this business to work. And it's hard and it's not the easiest thing that you end up doing. But at the end of the day, the hamster wheel teaches you got to get off of it to have a sustainable and successful business moving forward. And I didn't want to have a business failure. I never asked for that. I never said, this would be such a great lesson to learn, but I definitely was willing to learn from my mistakes. So when my business failed, from that outside looking in, very successful business, when it failed, and I looked back and reflected on why that happened, I knew one of my big issues was that I hadn't figured out how to touch business development every day. And so the rest of our episodes together, I'm going to show you what I learned about what it looks like to touch business development. And to be honest, I don't mean every day. I just mean you need to be touching it on a regular basis. So you're constantly filling your prospecting, your prospects pipeline, that funnel of potential clients, because you got to fill the funnel to get some to come out the bottom to say yes to working with you. And we're going to talk about what it looks like to fill that prospects funnel coming up in episode 4. So when I think about what it looks like with that business failure, that was one of my big lessons learned, is that I would get busy doing the work and I wouldn't be paying attention to where the next piece of work was going to come from. And it doesn't matter if your clients pay you a retainer or you're project-based or they work with you every year, you still need a number of clients. We all have a number of clients we need to be at capacity to make the revenue we want to make, to be able to pay our bills and to pay taxes, and then of course to pay ourselves, right? Running a business where the owner doesn't pay themselves is not a business. It's actually worse than a job because you're not paying yourself, which means you're not able to do the things you need to do, right, in terms of tithing and paying a mortgage, paying your bills on your personal side. So when I talk about business success, what I needed was a business that not only could, of course, manage its expenses, right, and could, of course, pay the taxes, but could actually pay me. And that was an important part that I think all business owners need to pay attention to. I mean, I have coached in my past like multi-million based businesses, like millions of dollars. And the owner is making less than $30,000 a year, but the business is bringing in over $1 million, right? And so there's something wrong with that picture in terms of you need to run a business that can support you, right? Not just a business that allows you to support paying your vendors and your employees. It needs to support you too as a business owner, because when we actually are doing well financially, that is when we're actually able to give abundantly, right? And we can't give abundantly if we're not running our business in a way that allows us to actually take, right? I'm not saying an astronomical wage, but a suitable owner's compensation. That's okay. That's part of running a smart business. And so when I looked at my business and as it was failing, it would make it 4 years, almost 5. And it was failing, and I had to really wave the white flag of surrender and just say, you know what? I'm not bringing in clients consistently. I haven't figured out a system, and it's really hard for me to move forward at this point. The other 2 lessons that I learned was that you have to protect your mindset. There's always going to be people who don't understand what you're doing when you decide to start a business. Particularly if you start a business they don't understand. If you start a business they understand, like maybe a CPA, like they kind of get it. But wow, when you start different types of businesses, people are like, you're doing what? And people pay you to do that? It's amazing the questions you get, even from your own family. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs, right? So starting a business is not a big deal. I like to say my family's problem is they all started restaurants. So they're the crazy kind of entrepreneurs. I was different. I was starting an HR consulting firm. And so as I watched that business fail, and I knew I didn't protect my mindset because people would ask questions. And then when you allow yourself to believe what their questions are stating versus knowing your truth, right? You open yourself up to just the little tiny crack opens up, and then the water starts to come in, and of that doubt and that ability to maybe stop taking your business as seriously as you should. So protecting your mindset, touching business development every day, and of course, figuring out this idea of scaling, because we all will hit a capacity. You can scale by employees, you can scale in other ways, right? But I hadn't figured out how to scale to be able to grow. So I wasn't on a hamster wheel, and my business could actually grow and not just be, right, a six-figure business or a multiple six-figure business. I never figured out how to make it grow. And so from a scaling perspective, and without having to work more, I guess is what I mean, like scaling into the terms of the business could grow without you having to work like every hour of every day. And you could actually have that true, right, separation of church and state, like that separation of like personal and business. It's kind of like that important piece. And I never figured that out with my first business, and it fell apart. And I had to take a job, and that was a really hard time in my life, taking that job. The idea of having to get up and having to go to an office and not being able to be flexible with my time. I mean, at the time, my children, I had two at the time, and my children, I believe, were still both in preschool. So if I remember my timeline correctly, they were both still in preschool. And it wouldn't be until I left that company that they would start school. But the idea there is, because remember, I was only there for about 18 months, that they were still babies. I mean, my kids are still, I got 3 kids under the age of 12. They're still babies, just slightly more self-sufficient now than they used to be. They're also a lot more needier in different ways than they used to be. But the idea there is that I lost the flexibility, I lost the freedom, I wasn't in control, and I like those aspects of my job. I know I'm not ultimately in control, but I am in control of doing what I think I'm being called to do, and to doing great work, and to serving my clients well. That I know I do well, that I know that those are some gifts that God has given me, and I'm using them to the best of my advantage and ability as best I can. But when I recognized that my business had failed, right? When I realized that my business had failed and I had to go get a job, I still looked for plan B. And it actually ended up being a coaching practice. I started a productivity and business coaching practice, and I would start that in 2013. And that business would explode in growth because I learned some lessons and applied some things. And one of the things I applied was, I want to get referrals like everybody else. I just don't want to ask for them. So how can I get them? Now we're going to start talking about that in some upcoming episodes of that process, how I cracked that code of generating referrals without asking, because it has made the biggest difference between where my business is today, right, and versus the failure that I have in my past. But I do think it's important for me to talk about, hey, I had a business. It had some pretty cool clients. I was interviewed on Bloomberg News. It had some pretty cool things happen. I had articles published. But it failed because I didn't figure out some fundamental pieces my business needed. And now I did. Started a business productivity and business coaching practice, exploded in growth. Then my clients, who were small business owners, started saying, you're exploding in growth. What are you doing? Told them about my referral process. And then they said, start teaching us that. So then a couple of years ago, I started just teaching the growth by referrals strategy of how do we generate referrals without asking. And since I've been able to generate over 100 referrals every year since I started my coaching practice, and now, of course, with my online training business and my one-on-ones that I do around referrals without asking, I still continue to generate those referrals because I follow 5 simple steps. And I'm going to teach you those 5 simple steps over the course of our time together with this season. But my clients started saying, teach us that. That would be really valuable to help us grow our business and not go that Easter famine mode and not be the always hustling salesperson, and to be really focused on doing what we do best, delivering value for our clients, but having a way of bringing in new clients, which we all know every business has to have, every business owner has to know how to do, and every business has to have a functioning business development process that's actually bringing in the clients that you can handle. And so I have been able to bring in over 100 referrals for a year. But what's really cool is watching my students, which is what I call my clients inside my Growth by Referrals program, watching their success and being like, I didn't know this was possible. And in some cases, they have faster success than I had, and they have crazy success. And that's wonderful. But whatever it is the success that they need to help their business grow. And I think that's an important part and an important piece of this overall story I want you to understand. So as you're thinking through what this looks like, why is my business failure so important? How am I going to apply the tactics that Stacey's going to teach me? I think it's important I start with the backstory. And I start with, listen, I started a business. I was an expert. I was good at what I did, but that didn't matter if I didn't know how to grow the business. And I went through this process of having to watch my business fail and wave the white flag of surrender, take down my business shingle, learned some lessons, reflected back, was like, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me here? Listened better, which is kind of important, and then started another business where I had great growth and incredible, wonderful growth that actually allowed me then to pivot my entire business to now just training people how to generate referrals without asking, and a few other things that I do about how do you turn clients and contacts into referral sources? How do you become referable? It's by creating sticky client experiences and some other things that I teach. And everything changed. Right? When I was able to recognize my business failed, now what am I going to do about it? And what am I going to learn from it? Remember, God wasn't picking on me, but he had handpicked me to go through some very particular challenges so that now I have a different perspective to share. And I have the platform with WYTV7 to share it with you guys, which is such a fun way to not only share business growth, but also share my faith. I don't really talk that much about my faith with my podcast and in my book. I think if you follow me for any length of time, not necessarily here, but through my free Facebook group, Referrals Without Asking, or on my LinkedIn profile, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook business page, or you read my book, or you follow my podcast, or you download it in my resources, I don't think you wouldn't know that I'm a Christian, but I don't get the opportunity to really talk about it. And I love this format to be able to really talk about what I believe God has gifted me with and has had me go through so that I can come out on the other end and share it with other business owners so that they can have success. And I'm excited for this platform. So thank you for joining me for this second episode of Straight Talk on Business Growth, where we are helping business owners find success, however they define success, because we don't participate in the comparison society. We're about doing what's right for us, right, and what God has called us to do. So I appreciate you joining me here for episode 2. I look forward to you joining me for episode 3. Remember, if you're commenting on the show, right, send me an email. You can go to my website. You can grab my email address, StaceyBrownRandall.com. You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel or on the podcast, wherever, right, you are able to leave comments. Jump on my Facebook page, whatever it is. Reach out to me. Tell me that you are watching Straight Talk on Business Growth. Give me a shout out. Let me know you're watching, and you could win. You could be the weekly winner of winning one free copy every week given away, Generating Business Referrals Without Asking, which is going to almost be like our study guide as we go through how I'm going to teach you my 5 simple steps to unleashing a referral explosion. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the backstory so you know, okay, this is where she was and this is where she is now, to put everything into context. So I look forward, of course, for you guys joining me for our next episode. And remember, if you're loving Straight Talk on Business Growth, if you're loving the show or any of the broadcaster shows that are being aired on WTV7, please consider making a donation. It is, of course, a nonprofit organization, so every donation, no matter how small, makes a big difference. You're not only supporting shows like mine, but you're supporting all the different shows that are out there when we have broadcasters talking about marriage, talking about finance, talking about their testimony, talking about their trials in life. Some really great stuff. I hope that you'll take some time to check out the other broadcasters and their shows. And of course, make sure you're joining me here every week. We have a new episode that is out. All right. I will see you guys next week as we continue our Straight Talk on business growth. Bye for now.